While the Obama administration appears to be indifferent to the plight of Christians in the Middle East, members of Congress are not. Congresswoman Diane Black of Tennessee has introduced a House resolution on religious freedom, which strongly condemns the violence against religious minorities in the Middle East. It reaffirms the commitment of the United States to promoting religious freedom and tolerance around the world and urges the Obama administration to appoint a special envoy to promote religious freedom of religious minorities in the Near East and South Central Asia, to name just a few. Joining me with the latest on her resolution, and as well as her reintroduction of the Healthcare Conscience Rights Act, which addresses religious freedom here at home, is the representative from the 6th Congressional District of Tennessee, Diane Black. Diane, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to be with you. I appreciate you having me on to talk about these important topics.
Well, I think it's appropriate that you are addressing both. The ability to live out your faith, to believe according to your faith here at home and live according to that, which is what your Conscience Rights Bill does in health care. But then at the same time, addressing the persecution abroad. Let's start first with the reintroduction of the Healthcare Conscience Rights Act, which addresses religious liberty here at home.
Sure. Well, as we had filed this last year and did not have action on it, but this year we're hoping to get this to move along, and this comes as a result of what the President did in the HHS, Health and Human Services mandate, when Kathleen Sebelius was still the Secretary over there, that required that anyone who offered insurance would have to have those contraceptives and also the abortifacient drugs in those. And we just really feel strongly this is a First Amendment right, that people have an ability and a right here in our country to have their religious conscience and to not be required by the federal government to violate those deeply held beliefs. And so that's what this bill does, once again, is to overcome what Kathleen Sebelius put in. And we all know about what happened with the Supreme Court in the Hobby Lobby case, and although we consider that to be a victory, it still did not settle the case completely, and so we're bringing H.R. 940 back, and we waited until that number was available so that people could consistently remember what that number was and the very importance of that bill.
Well, Congresswoman, I would have to think that in the wake of the Hobby Lobby decision, in which the court says under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, Hobby Lobby, Conestoga Wood in that particular case, privately held businesses can use that as a defense against being forced to violate their religious beliefs. So I would think that in the wake of that, the push for your legislation would be bolstered because the court has actually said, yes, Americans have that right.
Well, and we would hope so, and as we know that we have the majority over in the Senate, although it is the majority in the Senate, we still don't have the 60 votes because of the way in which they operate there. You need 60 votes to even have a bill be considered for debate. And so we're hoping that we're going to be able to have some movement over in the Senate this year. We have had both Democrat and Republican support on this bill in the House, and I anticipate there will be some of that over in the Senate. But you're right that the Supreme Court's decision was very encouraging for us, and that we believe that this does set a tone for what the Supreme Court believed, but remembering that this was just for a closely held family business, the decision was made, and not for those organizations outside of that, and then also especially the religious organizations, the churches and the other kinds of organizations that are based on religious belief were not included in that. So it is important that we would bring this bill forward and that we would continue to keep this topic moving forward, and that's the reason why we refiled this bill this year.
A very good point to drive home is that while we celebrate the victory in the Hobby Lobby Conestoga Wood case, it was narrow in its application. And so there are still those that are outside of the parameters of that decision that are being forced by the federal government under this HHS mandate to fund drugs that can induce an abortion. So what you're trying to do is make the application of, or not make the application, but in effect what it would do is allow everyone to exercise that religious freedom and not be forced into that scheme pushed on them by the president and Obamacare.
Exactly, Tony, and it would be a full exemption regardless of whether you were a family business or whether you're a church or a religious charity, any organization that has a deeply held belief. This is a First Amendment right. We have 110 sponsors on the bill right now, including several Democrats, and so again, it is a bipartisan effort, and we're going to continue to move forward with this bill.
And that's H.R. 940. H.R. 940.
That's the same number that it has been in the past. We waited for that number to come up. They reserved it for us, and that was a good thing that we'll have a consistency there.
All right, folks, you can find out more about that. Go to the website, TonyPerkins.com. This would be one of those action steps where you can contact your member of Congress and say, hey, sign on to H.R. 940, which is the Healthcare Conscience Rights Act that is being sponsored by Representative Diane Black of Tennessee. All right, Diane, I want to move on quickly to in the time we have left. An issue that is at the forefront of world attention, and that's what's unfolding in the Middle East and elsewhere, where we're seeing this growing persecution of Christians abroad. And of course, I think that it's in part because we have this growing intolerance toward Christianity here at home at the hands of our own government. That's sending signals to these tyrants abroad that they're free to persecute Christians. But you're bringing this back to the forefront, saying, hey, look back to 1998. This should be a priority for us in our foreign policy.
Absolutely should, and it is really disturbing. We're seeing this happen more and more frequently to larger and larger groups, whether it was the Christian schoolgirls there in Nigeria by the Boko Haram, or we're seeing it. As the bombing took place over there in France. There were 21 Christians in Libya. They titled their video, "A Message Signed with Blood to the Nation of the Cross." So this is escalating. It is getting worse. We have an administration who doesn't name it for what it is. You can't fight an enemy if you don't name it and declare who they are. He refuses to use the radical Islamist title to these people that are persecuting these Christians and other religious minorities. And we have always been a country that has defended other nations, and especially under the flag of being able to have freedom to be able to worship.
Well, I want to point out for our listeners that this is not new, that you go back to 1998 when Congress, Bill Clinton was president, signed the International Religious Freedom Act, which stated that religious freedom of all people was a priority for us in our foreign policy, but that has not been the case under this administration, and this puts the issue back to the forefront. Now, let's talk about the special envoy. The president has been slow to appoint these individuals that would represent and look out for religious freedom abroad.
It's very disappointing. And back in 2014, we had the passage of the Near East and South Central Asia Religious Freedom Act. We have urged the president to get engaged in this. The United States has always been the respected nation in the entire world to stand up for religious freedom. And we don't see this president as having a concern there. And this resolution is to urge him to get engaged, to condemn this violence, to reaffirm the commitment of the United States to protecting religious freedom and tolerance around the world. Call for the governments of the Middle East to uphold their internationally recognized human right of freedom of religion, freedom from religious persecution. And so we believe that this special envoy can accomplish these various goals that we have, and we're urging the president to name a special envoy and get engaged in helping to protect Christians and other religious minorities throughout the Middle East.
All right, Congresswoman Diane Black, thanks so much for joining us. Once again, appreciate all you do in defending faith, family, and freedom on Capitol Hill.
Well, thank you, Tony, for having me on, and I appreciate all that you all do in raising the topics that are so important for our nation, especially at this critical point in our nation's time where they don't seem to be highlighted, especially by this administration. So always appreciate talking to you, Tony. Thank you.